The storm was relentless, pounding against the windows of the small rural train station in Vermont. A faint whistle echoed in the distance as the night's last train approached. The station, old and creaky, seemed to groan in protest against the howling wind. Claire Harrington checked her watch nervously. It was nearly midnight, and the train to Boston was late. She had promised her boss she would arrive in the city by morning for an urgent pitch meeting. The storm had disrupted schedules all day, leaving her stranded longer than expected. She was the only one in the waiting area, except for a security guard dozing in the corner. Her phone buzzed. A message from her sister: "You sure it's safe to travel in this weather? Roads are flooded everywhere." Claire sighed and typed back quickly, "No choice. I'll be fine." As she hit send, the station lights flickered. She looked up nervously at the aging ceiling. "Great," she muttered, clutching her laptop bag tighter. She scanned the station, and her eyes landed on a man sitting at the far end of the bench. She hadn't noticed him arrive. He was tall, with a sharp jawline and piercing eyes that seemed to lock onto her the moment she glanced his way. His dark coat was soaked, and his fedora cast a shadow over his face. Claire felt a shiver run down her spine, though the station's heating system was humming faintly. "Waiting for the Boston train?" the man asked, his voice deep and calm. Claire hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, it's running late." "Storms like this have a way of delaying things," he said, leaning back on the bench. "But some things," he paused, as if choosing his words carefully, "are never late. They always arrive exactly when they're meant to." Claire furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man smiled faintly but didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out an old pocket watch and stared at it for a moment before tucking it back into his coat. The whistle of the train grew louder, cutting through the storm. Claire felt a wave of relief. As the train pulled into the station, its headlights illuminated the platform. Claire grabbed her bag and stood up, glancing at the man again. He remained seated, his eyes following her every move. The train doors slid open with a hiss, and Claire stepped inside. The carriage was dimly lit and nearly empty, save for a couple sitting in the far corner. She chose a seat by the window, setting her bag on the seat next to her. The train jolted forward, leaving the station behind. The man from the station didn't board the train. She looked out the window, but he was gone. "Weird," she muttered to herself. The storm outside seemed to intensify as the train picked up speed. Rain lashed against the windows, and the overhead lights flickered intermittently. Claire pulled out her laptop, determined to work on her presentation. As she typed, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. She glanced up and saw a figure standing at the far end of the carriage. It was the man from the station. Her heart skipped a beat. "That's impossible," she whispered. She had seen him stay behind. The man began walking toward her, his footsteps eerily silent on the metal floor. Claire's breath quickened as he approached, stopping a few feet away. "I told you some things are never late," he said, his voice calm but chilling. Claire gripped the edge of her seat. "How did you get on this train?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the pocket watch again, holding it up for her to see. The hands on the watch weren't moving. "Time, it doesn't work the way you think it does," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "This train isn't taking you where you think it is." Claire felt a surge of panic. She stood up and moved toward the emergency cord, but the man stepped into her path. "You need to listen," he said, his voice firm. "If you pull that, you'll regret it." "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The man's expression softened. "Someone who's been here before," he said. "This train is a passage, Claire. It chooses its passengers carefully. And tonight, it chose you." The lights flickered again, plunging the carriage into darkness for a moment. When they came back on, the man was gone. Claire looked around frantically, but there was no trace of him. The couple in the corner were staring at her now, their faces pale and expressionless. Claire's chest tightened. She stumbled back to her seat and grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. The train began to slow down, and Claire peered out the window. They were pulling into a station, but it wasn't on the schedule. The platform was bathed in an eerie blue light, and the name on the sign was unreadable, as though it had been scratched out. The doors slid open, and Claire's heart pounded as she saw a group of shadowy figures standing on the platform. They didn't move, their faces obscured by the dim light. "End of the line," a voice announced over the intercom, though the words sounded distorted, almost otherworldly. Claire's instincts screamed at her to stay put, but the couple in the corner stood and began walking toward the doors. They turned to her as they passed, their eyes hollow. "You have to get off," the woman said, her voice a monotone whisper. "It's the only way." "No," Claire said, shaking her head. "This isn't real. This isn't happening." The man from the station appeared again, standing on the platform outside. He raised his hand, gesturing for her to join him. "Claire," he called, his voice carrying through the storm. "You can't go back. You have to trust me." The train began to hum, its engine coming to life again. Claire knew she had only seconds to decide. She looked at the man, then at the shadowy figures on the platform. Her heart raced as she made her choice. The doors closed with a hiss, and the train lurched forward, leaving the station behind. Claire collapsed into her seat, tears streaming down her face. She looked out the window, but the platform was gone, swallowed by the storm. The man's voice echoed in her mind, "Some things are never late." She didn't know where the train was taking her, but one thing was certain, she would never forget this journey.